Hello to everyone watching, and thank you for tuning into this webinar with Prolific North and Better Place Recruitment. Over the past 6 months, I've been speaking to industry leaders in the marketing world on the subject of diversity and inclusion in my podcast. Today, I'm joined by some guests from that series to hear their experiences, what diversity and inclusion means to them, and what it means in their business. We'll also discuss the initiatives that they have implemented and challenges that they face. As the host of the podcast, it's been really interesting to gain insight into the perspectives on this often difficult matter. And I wanted to conclude the series with this webinar in order to pool that knowledge and share some of the reflections and actionables moving forward. For me, the biggest learning has been that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and every person who I've spoken to has a different perspective and different approaches. So I wanted to enable everyone to come together and express what they do. Before we start, I also wanted to address the conversations that have happened in the lead up to this webinar. It did appear on the promo that we didn't have a diverse enough panel, and I think the problem was that a couple of women were missed off the pictures. So thank you to the people who raised that, and I agree and understand where you're coming from. I think my approach with this podcast was from my little recruitment desk to reach out to people who lead in industry and find out what they are doing in their business to keep D&I on the top of their agenda. So maybe that's part of the discussion that we need to make sure that we're keeping things diverse. But either way, I'm committed in future to speaking and hosting diverse panels to ensure equality and inclusion. So without further ado, an introduction to our speakers. If you want to tell me your name and what you do, and we'll start with Sarah.
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I'm the Operations Director at Six and Flow, which is a growth agency in Manchester.
Thanks. Richard?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Rich George. I'm the UK Head of Organic Performance and SEO at Wavemaker.
Thanks. Ian?
Hello everyone, I'm Ian Lenehan. I'm the Recruitment Manager for McCann Manchester.
Catherine?
Good morning everyone, my name is Catherine Garrod. I'm the founder of Compelling Culture, and I help organisations boost engagement, diversity and inclusion, both internally and externally.
Rob?
Morning everyone, my name is Rob Shaw. I'm the Chief Exec of a Leeds-based agency called CreativeRace.
Thank you. And Dan?
Hi there, I'm Dan Sodergren. I'm co-founder of a company called Your Flock. We help employment engagement and remote teams align to their values. I also have the joy, as Rosie knows, of being the ex-head of the Manchester Publicity Association, their diversity and inclusion group and steering group. So huge believer in, of course, this subject, and used to run a marketing agency myself many years ago for my sins. So yeah, kind of full circle on the whole thing.
Thanks. If you'd like to submit a question to our panel, then you can use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll pick the best near the end of today's webinar. So first up today is Rob Shaw, CEO of CreativeRace. So when I spoke to Rob on the podcast, a key point of our discussion was the difficulty in maintaining an inclusive recruitment process and hiring the needed skill set for your business. Do you think that that's a challenge for businesses in general, as well as your own?
Quick answer, yes. I think what was really interesting when we did the podcast is we ended up splitting it into two conversations. One at the point that I just joined this agency and began sort of our growth journey, and a lot of that included recruitment, and then recognizing what had changed over 6 months. And I think it's hard. It's hard 6 or 7 months on. Speaking to other organisations as I still educate myself in this topic, it remains difficult. I think what we're seeing right now as an agency, and I know it's the same with a lot, is that it's a very small talent pool right now. I think in a post-lockdown world, people are considering what the future holds for them, and different people choosing to go down different career paths. So you've got a smaller recruitment pot. And when you're doing that, it's very difficult to try and maintain those standards or those principles or those ways of working that you have an aspiration for. And you then get to the balance, which I know we talked about, of do I compromise the growth of my agency that potentially damages the careers of the people who already work here? Or do you maintain those standards in order to try and keep diversity and inclusion at the core of what we do? And I don't think it's just an agency thing. I've spent a lot of time, and Rosie, it's been fantastic that you've made us all keep this at front of mind and consider it. Speaking to people in other industries, speaking to people in much larger organisations that have got the ability to employ D&I professionals, that even in those organisations, when I'm asking for examples of companies that are really getting this right and that I can look towards for ideas and inspiration, there are no rafts of exemplars here. I think everybody is still learning it, trying to build some common language. Yeah, I think it's been really interesting listening to different people on the podcast and doing some research. We've still got to build up that common understanding. And as I've been building a wider leadership team and bringing people in, it's been interesting to see what people's understanding of what D&I means and that we want to be an inclusive employer. Well, what does that entail? What does that mean on a really practical basis? Not just for bringing new people in, but what it means to the existing employment pool. I took the opportunity just before coming on this just to look at all the roles that are available on the Prolific North website at the moment. And the vast majority of them don't talk about the D&I credentials or aspirations of the companies that are recruiting. And I include my own in that. And it is a reflection of the fact that I still think we're scratching the surface of how we educate people around what this means. And until we can increase that recruitment pool there to bring new talent into our organisations from broader bases, then I think we'll perpetuate it. So yes, it's hard, and I think it cuts across multiple industries.
Yeah, and that's what I touched on at the beginning, trying to there is no one size fits all solution. Ian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I agree with all the points I think Rob raised there. When somebody resigns, we need to hire a replacement. It's always a challenge balancing the need to find a highly talented person as soon as possible and ensure the client expectations are delivered, with that need to ensure a fair and inclusive process. There's a natural tendency to think straight away about people you already know or who colleagues already know, rush them in, interview them, and straight away you've reduced the opportunity for a wider pool of candidates to apply. As Rob said, candidates are scarce at certain levels. That adds to the sense of recruiting as quickly as you can. But we've actually seen in McCann recently a couple of examples of where just slowing things down slightly, and we're talking here a week, not months, has allowed that longer time for people to apply. Ultimately, we found diverse talent because that advert was out in the marketplace for longer. Client expectations and requirements don't pause when somebody leaves. So you straight away got that feeling of we need a replica of the person that's moving on. But again, as soon as we put in terms of criteria, we need TV experience or we need PPC budgets of X, you're immediately putting yourself in that position of recruiting from the same small pool of non-diverse candidates. So it's a really difficult balance to achieve, but I think we try to do is just be consistent with every role, advertise all our channels, be as open as we can with the application criteria, give time for a broader group of candidates to apply. And that's the only way we can really try and strike that balance that will ultimately allow more candidates from diverse backgrounds to join the industry and flourish. Yeah,
I agree. Thank you. Next up, Richard, managing partner at Wavemaker UK. Hi, Richard. When we spoke, you had some really interesting kind of personal perspectives on being kind of a textbook white male figure, but you recognize that you don't have the first-hand experiences of any marginalized group, but as a business leader, you are trying to do everything possible to improve diversity and inclusion in the business. How do you think you demonstrate being a business leader that has this attitude?
Yeah, hi Rosie. That's right. I mean, I think to start, I'm not sure I class myself as textbook in the way I approach things, but yeah, I am a white male in a senior leadership role. But that isn't something that I should be apologetic about, but it does give me the chance to see how I can positively promote change in our industry and our agency through sort of positive action, but also we shouldn't stereotype white males, as this kind of also goes against the grain of what we're trying to achieve here in changing equality. I can draw on personal experiences, specific examples that maybe my wife has faced in her growth in her career. You know, she's on the senior leadership team in Manchester University now. She's a world-renowned engineer, a broadcaster and a presenter. But as a woman in engineering, which is a very heavily male-dominated sector, especially in the Western world, the challenges that she has faced has helped in some way to inspire me to try to ensure that I can use what influence I have in our marketing and media industry to affect that change. So going back to the senior leader at Wavemaker, I mean, I hopefully can be a powerful ally. I can affect positive change.
Yeah.
And this change starts in the form of reviewing and changing and backing our recruitment policies. So this is trying to create, as Rob said, that greater diversity in the talent pool mix. So trying to change the entry requirements, looking at recruiting from different sources that we wouldn't have considered before, you know, partnering with different trusts, and even considering, you know, we're part of WPP, we're part of Group M, we've got a global network of potential candidates if we really want to drive that diversity. But in recruitment, we also need to look at how we can add to our culture and shape the future of the business, and not just look at those that fit the current culture, if that makes sense. We need to have that candidate pool that also reflects our clients, reflects our customers, and also reflects the communities where our businesses run in London and in Manchester. But again, as Rob said just previously, the current growth in digital marketing specifically has really tested this. You know, we've seen a boom in digital and search professionals over the past few years, and especially the past 18 months, we've seen significant growth. And COVID has driven it. This is a positive from COVID. You know, we've seen digital acceleration and transformation of a number of brands. But people with digital experience are in such high demand, there is simply not the depth of talent pool, let alone diversity. So a key part of the processes and practices we need to do at Wavemaker and our industry needs to do is probably look beyond our generation, our current generation now, and how can we create those recruitment programs through schools, apprenticeship schemes and trusts to bring that next generation of talent in. So for example, in many businesses in our industry, in the past, we could have been guilty of always looking for that polish or that finish rather than looking to the potential. So maybe again, by working with a number of organizations through talent and recruitment teams at Group M, we can bring in more junior talent from a diverse background now that will help change in the short term at a junior level. But that mid to long term is going to take a little bit of time, but long term it will impact the richness, the diverse representation that we do have at a senior level. And to bring this to life a little bit with what are we doing at Wavemaker? Globally, we've got 5 pillars that we've created in association with all our local markets, and we've created pillars around listening, education, acting, measuring and communicating to our business on the D&I topic. We're going to listen continuously to the perspective and experiences of the people that actually work within our agencies. You know, we're going to educate our leaders and around the importance of these topics, and then make sure we act decisively and with courage to make sure that we are held accountable by putting measures in place. So all senior leaders are being held accountable within our business for trying to positively make change. But also be vocal. You know, D&I is a topic that at the moment it is a hot topic, but it has been around for a long time. So how do we make sure both internally and externally we keep amplifying the voice of the people that work within our organization? So positively provoking change from recruitment, as we've mentioned. But another thing we can do in our industry is look at how we plan and how we buy media and how we target audiences, and especially establishing community ties to bring in that talent. So again, some examples of how we've tried to address this at Wavemaker. You know, we created communities. So women at Wavemaker, Wavemaker Pride and Wavemaker Roots. Women at Wavemaker ran a brilliant series of live panels to celebrate and inspire people. And then we went on to Wavemaker Roots, who brought fun into this by creating and celebrating the foods of over 20 different communities that we have within Wavemaker. So 20 different diverse cultures that we have. So going back to your opening question of what can I do in my position as a senior leader at Wavemaker, I can and will hold myself accountable for positive action and change. I can ensure that I can be this powerful ally, hopefully, and use the influence I have. Embrace that short, mid and long-term D&I policy and program, but also don't let this drop from the agenda. This isn't just a hot topic now. This is something that we need to positively do to change our industry.
Yeah, of course. For years moving forward, it's a slightly longer game to be focusing on this, and I want to make sure it's not just a flash in the pan thing. So absolutely, thanks for that. Any thoughts on that, Rob?
I'm in danger of echoing some of Richard's comments. Again, as a white male on the panel, I'd be lying if I said when you first approached me, Rosie, to be involved in the podcast, that it doesn't go through your mind. I'm not sure I've got the right to talk about it, or at least I'm not going to help broaden the conversation or the inputs into it. But I can provide a platform. And I can make sure that it remains on the front of people's agenda. So I can't deny who I am, and I can't deny my background, and I won't make an excuse for the role that I play in my agency. But what I can do is, to Richard's point, try and be accountable. So it would be very easy when you contact me, just to say, oh look, I've only just started, I've got a lot on, I'm not sure I can do this. And actually, if we do that, all we're going to do is just perpetuate a problem. And actually, it's a problem that then affects the long-term growth and success of my organisation. So I think it is that accountability. And I think irrespective of our background, if we can hold ourselves accountable and help promote that common language and that common understanding, then we're all taking those baby steps to try and move it up the agenda.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that you all wanted to get involved, and I do think it's essential that those business leaders are creating that platform for everybody to be able to bring their whole selves to work. So absolutely. Before we come to Sarah Latham at Six and Flow, a quick reminder that you can submit your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll get a few of those at the end of the webinar. Next up, Sarah, Operations Director at Six and Flow. So thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. Something that stuck with me from our conversations is the point that you've made, and actually leads on nicely from previous points here, about having a vulnerable, humble senior leadership team to give that platform for a diverse and inclusive business. So can you expand on that point, please? Like, how are vulnerability and inclusion linked, and how does that benefit the business?
Yeah, so for me, I guess personally, vulnerability is a kind of critical skill that every leader, so everybody on this panel and everybody that's in a senior kind of leadership role should have and should actively be practicing. So they're two slightly different things in terms of actively practicing it is slightly harder, but it's all about connection and trust. So in terms of, for me, that kind of vulnerability piece it really comes from the top. So from a Six and Flow perspective, it's making sure that we are, as leaders, vulnerable, and that we are having those conversations and we are showing our vulnerability to the rest of the business. We're also encouraging that through the business. So one of my favorite books that I continually go back to is Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which I'm sure many people have read. And essentially, it's all about the fact that actually it's possible to care personally and challenge directly at the same time. So obviously, to care personally is about caring for each other, for other people. Challenging directly is about sharing your perspective and then inviting others to do the same, but also welcoming that opinion, that perspective, and all of those kind of things. And I think as leaders, we should be caring personally about each individual within our business. That goes without saying. but it's also about challenging directly and encouraging those around us to challenge us and open those discussions. But you can only really do that if you've built trust and you have that connection in place. So that's really where, for me, there is always going to be an element of vulnerability there. And I think, that allows those difficult conversations. It also makes sure that people have a space, they have a environment where they feel included, but there's also a sense of belonging within the business. And there's an environment, or you're creating an environment of inclusion. And that might differ in different environments and different agencies, but for me, that's kind of a real big focus, and it all starts with that vulnerability piece.
Yeah, of course. And it's potentially maybe easier, not easier, but when with a smaller agency. I mean, coming from a bigger agency, potentially, Richard, with those initiatives, do you find that you can still allow everybody to bring their whole selves to work and give that space, considering you're coming from a global group?
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about vulnerability and caring, I think it's that is so important, because I mentioned there, I think we had over 20 different cultures represented within our business in the UK. And so caring about everybody's opinion and voice and listening to the people in our business and what they have to say, it's been so inspiring looking at some of the material that's come out from these people and just communicating across our whole agency. So yeah, 100%. I'm going to go and see if I can find that book, because I love that thing there. Caring personally, but challenging as well. I think I need to go and look at that. But yeah, I completely get what you're saying, and I think it is so important to listen to everybody across our agencies, and especially any of the different cultures within our agency, to make sure that comes to the fore.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Richard. So Catherine, who is the founder of Compelling Culture and was head of inclusion at Sky. Thanks for joining us, Catherine. We haven't spoken on a podcast yet, but I wanted to bring your experience to the table after you've set up your own consultancy, Compelling Culture, and having obviously previously led with such a huge business. So broadly speaking, where do you think companies are going wrong, and what would you love to see companies doing more of?
Well, that's a big question. I think what I saw, and I love what Richard said about listen, educate and act. So in the wake of George Floyd being murdered last year, organisations rushed to act before really listening and educating. And I think listening is so underrated. I think listening is huge. Listen to learn, show up to listen, don't show up to know, which I think is really hard as a leader, because you kind of get to a point in your career where you're expected to know the answers and guide the organisation. So I think that's a huge part, is around listening, and I can't emphasise that enough. I think the other thing, this might be a little bit controversial in the conversation that we've had so far on this webinar, is you need to put as much focus on career progression and retention as you do on recruitment. So if you've got people in your organisations that are already from underrepresented groups and they are in the minority, what is it about their experience? Is it good? What would make them love to stay in your organisation? What opportunities are you creating for people to grow their careers in your organisation? And you need to put as much emphasis on that as you are on recruiting, because otherwise everyone just ends up in this spiral of going and looking for everyone else's underrepresented talent. And actually, for the people that are underrepresented, it's just a horrible experience, because it feels like I'm being targeted because, rather than the organisation I work in genuinely cares about creating an experience that I want to stay, that I belong, that I'm valued, that I get good opportunities to grow my career, etc. So culture kind of underpins everything. And I think what I see is loads of organisations are hugely committed, have stepped up, have got tons of really, really passionate people doing the work in terms of, creating communities or networks, or thinking about positive action, or making commitments as leadership. There's absolutely tons of investment in that space. the magic only really happens is when you combine that will with skill. So if you haven't tied that together with the skill of taking an organization through change and underpinning and embedding everything into policies, processes, systems, how you make decisions, where you spend your money, which customers are you serving, which customers aren't you serving, who's benefiting the most, who's benefiting the least, are we okay with that? If we're not okay with that, what are we going to do? That's when you make it stick in an organization. I think the real risk is if passionate people haven't got that foundational stuff and the embedding stuff in an organization, there's going to come a point where people are fatigued and they become disenfranchised. So you've got to harness all that passion and that will and that commitment with the even harder work, actually, of going back. You know, if you've got organizations that are, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, hundreds of years old, going back and looking at how things were set up and what needs to be changed. And it's not about, you know, reducing the standards. It is about removing the barriers that have been set up in an organization that were intentionally exclusive at the time. You know, it's about going, okay, that's a barrier. You know, if we're saying they've always got to have this much experience, or they must have always delivered this, or they must have always worked here, or they must have had this education, or they must have worked in these kinds of organizations, all of that's exclusive straight away. You're immediately narrowing your pool. So yeah, it's a big question, but I think combining skill and will is at the heart of all of it, and listening is massive.
Yeah, of course. And that's, you know, I said at the beginning, there is no one size fits all, but there is no silver bullet, but being able to invest in the D&I within your business and keep the ball rolling is one of the main things that I've taken away from having these conversations and that I'm seeing. Thank you so much for that, Catherine. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Dan, I don't think we've come to you yet. Do you have any thoughts on those points?
So many that I'm literally writing down post-it notes and listening to all the wisdom involved. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, from us, from a Your Flock point of view, it does very much tie into this whole thing about, you know, how do we make change, as Catherine was right saying, you know, how do you actually make the change happen, and how do you cement it, how do you create the foundations? Because this is what it's really about, isn't it? You know, as Richard and Rob have said, it's about change. It's about personal change as leadership. Yes, absolutely. It's about changes because of COVID and other things, but it's also about how do you change the culture of business. And changing the culture of a business. We've got to be careful when we say these words, and I won't swear, I'm a bit of a thing for it because I can sometimes say the wrong words. So it's lovely that we're talking about, you know, global opportunities here, and the cultures, different cultures equals different, you know, different countries. True, but the company culture, you know, you have to have company culture, you have to have it added to. But actually, I would say don't hire for company culture fit. You actually hire for values fit. And that's different. And people go, oh, what about our brand values? But it's not about brand values, actually. It's deeper than that. And people are like, is there deeper than brand values? Yes, there is, because that's just stuff on the wall, yeah? So, and you know, Catherine's point and other people's point, you know, emotional intelligence is going to be absolutely key here. And it's vulnerability, yes, but also emotional intelligence. And that isn't something that naturally lends itself to people in power at the moment because of who they are and how they've learned things and how they've been taught stuff. So this is brand new to loads of people, and I'm going to say something. I'm not going to say it's radical candor because it's not. It's not radical candor. I'm not emotionally intelligent enough to do that. But you know, if people want to find out, you know, how do we do this? How do we make these changes? Right. Number one, at the Manchester Publicity Association, this is why we created the Big Idea. There's a hashtag called the Big Idea. Go and search for it on social media. We got together 15 people from different backgrounds, completely diverse and inclusive, and came up with 21 different tips you could use. Number one, you can go, you know, educate yourself with that. I'm not saying we've got all the answers, but there's some there. Yeah, so that's an easy one to do. The bigger one I was really thinking about is this whole idea of listening. Yeah, listening and then being data driven with your actions. And that's what I think is really exciting from, you know, listening to Richard, being an ally, listening to Rob, and what, you know, these thoughts that everyone's having is the key one really is, lads, and of course, ironically not doing it because I'm talking too much, is the listening bit. You know, listen to your people and listen to everyone. And I'm going to have to say, radical candor, I don't think it's to do with a scarcity of talent. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have that. Not in this world, it's not. And there's two reasons why not. One, you're now in a global marketplace. because you are, by the way. That's welcome to the world of remote work. 45% of people now want to do it, up to 96%, depending on which industry you're in. Marketing people are going to be working remotely. So you can't say we can't get the people. It's just nonsense. It's a nonsense. It's not true. Yeah. Now, it might be we haven't got the culture which keeps people who are diverse in our business because they leave. Totally with you. But that's a different point, isn't it? We cannot be saying, oh, there's not enough women in tech. Look at the work that Becky Taylor's doing, and look at the work that's being done. You cannot be saying that you can't get the right people. You might not be able to. Your company might not be able to. But the talent's out there, and and therefore we've got to listen to our own people. I know I'd talk too much. Sorry, but I mean, it's just because you can't hide behind it anymore. We can't say, oh, there's not enough people. There's not enough black people. Not enough disabled people. There's not enough LBG. There is, of course, there is. You just got to go out to the world, and they're already there because they exist. And it does make me smile when we say, "Oh, diversity and inclusion's like a hot topic." I mean, come on. I mean, that's just it's almost fundamentally insulting because it's like, well, they didn't matter before, but now people are grumbling. If in the marketing agencies, if 2% of people are black in marketing agencies, you've got to hire more black people. It's not that complicated, is it? Really, and if your board's only 20% women, well, you need more women on the board. It's actually not complicated. And if you're saying, well, there aren't enough talented women, it's absolute nonsense. It's not true, is it? It's just you don't know them. You don't know them. You just haven't met them. And if you haven't met them, that's a marketing problem. Sorry to be so honest, because if you're still recruiting in a kind of 30-mile radius, you've missed a meeting. You know what I mean? Like, those times have gone. Don't get me wrong. In the last 15 months, we've had 15 years worth of change, and I get it. It's hard. And I'll just end up with the last thing I heard yesterday, which is brilliant, from a guy called Dominic Price. Brilliant thing he said. He said, with this whole new world, assume it's hard. And I know it might sound obvious, but just assume it's going to be harder than it was before. Because at the moment, we're all saying, oh, it's a bit tricky. Just assume it's going to be harder. It is going to be harder. But D&I's actually, I think, going to be easier. Because actually, you're now in a global marketplace. I bet you wished, Rosie, you'd never asked me that bloody question.
No, I do not wish that. And I'm glad we're on the webinar to talk, so that's fine. A couple of points from that. I think what we meant was that from diversity and inclusion being a hot topic, it's been present for so long, and I want it to continue to business leaders to continuously be addressing it within their own business. So I think nothing was meant by that. We just want to make sure that it is continued to be being spoken about.
And I say this not in a bad way, and I know I've just interrupted, which proves I'm not emotionally intelligent, and that was rude. Sorry, it wasn't meant to be a microaggression. But seriously, psychologically safe space. And I mean that wholeheartedly. Like, there's been some feedback of people saying, oh, well, this, that. Okay, but hey, if you're trying to make a change in your business, that's awesome. If you're an ally to people, that's awesome. I cannot, because I'm not part of the LGBT plus community, and I'm learning that myself, which is why when we did the work with Manchester Publicity Association, I said, look, it can't just be me, because that's silly, because that's not diverse and inclusive at all. I'm just a bloke. So we got 16 people to help out, and that's how we made it more diverse and inclusive. There are other things, by the way, and there's one that we're not talking about today, but age in marketing is a problem. You can't be over 50. It's like I can't remember, Logan's Run kind of thing that happens. You know what I mean? You just, they're not allowed to exist. So one of the biggest taboos is around age as well. So let's not think diversity and inclusion is just, a black guy with dreads or, a woman or whatever. That's silly. It's bringing everyone to the table. It makes marketing better because your marketplace is now global. So you have to address that straight away in marketing. I get very passionate about it. Sense.
Of course, and that's why you're here. And there's a couple of points that you touched on that I'm going to address in a question that I want to ask you a little bit later. Before we come on to that, I just want to touch a little bit more on actual sort of recruitment, because we touched a lot on inclusivity, and come to you, Ian, if that's all right. So Ian is recruitment manager at McCann, Manchester. Thanks for joining us, Ian. Ian, when we spoke, you were really vocal about what McCann is doing from that recruitment perspective with regards to diversifying your workforce. So can you expand a little bit on what your company initiatives are for recruiting from a wider range of backgrounds?
Absolutely. I think the first thing I'd say is it's a work in progress. We've tried some things, some have worked, others haven't for various reasons. And I think it's ultimately highlighted that no one initiative is sufficient. You have to consider your whole recruitment approach from initial outreach through to offer stage. No, there is no one magic bullet, so to speak.
Yeah.
We've probably made most progress to date with early careers roles. So we know there is a lack of diversity, particularly in areas like creative and media. What we've been trying to tackle is broadening routes into the industry to hire the leaders of the future. And a big part of that is outreach. So we actually started by playing with different assessment processes, trialing out blind hiring, and they're all very important steps. But if you're not attracting diverse applications, it's all for nothing. So I also linked to that, I believe as the industry as a whole, we don't do enough to shout about the opportunities available in the industry to the next generation of talent at schools, colleges and universities. So we've tried to really focus on that. Historically, we've had a very successful apprenticeship scheme, probably nearly 10 years old now. But outside of that, virtually all of our trainee roles have gone to graduates, and usually graduates from marketing disciplines. So the outreach has matched that. We've been talking to marketing graduates. But when you look at the statistics, those courses are amongst the least diverse, particularly in terms of ethnicity. And there's no reason why history graduates, English graduates, economics graduates should be any less successful at McCann with the training we offer. So we've tried to target our advertising at a broader range of disciplines. We've attended a lot more general careers events and hosted events aimed at students from underrepresented backgrounds. But we've had to change the approach as well. So it's not about selling McCann Manchester to marketing students who understand the industry. It's more of a focus on selling why a career in the industry is worth considering. And our D&I council have been really involved as well, as we feel it's important that diverse candidates can talk to people from similar backgrounds and see them thriving in the industry. When you go to these events and you talk to students, it's clear there's a captive audience there. They want to know what we do, they want to know more about it. So it's our job as an industry, I think, more to sell that story and to a much broader audience. The next step of that for us is to widen it more to colleges and encourage greater diversity on our apprenticeship programs and trainee roles. So this week we've hired a great trainee who's chosen apprenticeship route after college rather than uni. I know, Rob, you spoke on your podcast about you were work ready at an earlier age, and university isn't the right path for an increasing proportion of young people today. As an industry, we've got to be a lot more open-minded to that. So at McCann, we're very much behind the Kickstart scheme that the government's rolling out at the moment. And we've got 80 joining across the UK in the next few weeks. We're looking very closely at T-levels, which is a brilliant initiative. And there's a number of courses there where students are going to be leaving college with real world experience of digital disciplines, craft and production disciplines. As an industry, we've got to make sure that there are routes into the industry for those people in a couple of years' time. And we're also going to be rolling out an initiative very soon where it's a partnership aimed at helping young people from underrepresented backgrounds gain a chance to gain real world experience at McCann and try to express themselves more through creativity. So they've got a pathway into the industry. So that's been the bulk of what we've done. It's been very focused on the outreach. We've done some things around our recruitment process. So for early careers roles, we've removed almost all qualifying criteria now. We've introduced blind hiring. We've introduced an assessment stage before interviews. And that's allowed us to assess more around skills rather than whether they've studied the right course, and it's proven very successful. But these things take time to get right. Some of our initiatives have failed miserably. We brought in video questions initially and ended up seeing a pool of interviewees that were selected because of high-end production skills, not because they could be great account managers. So there's lots of things you've got to trial along the way, but I think we're getting to a point now where that combination of outreach and our assessment processes is starting to deliver results.
Okay, fantastic. And it sounds like some of those are really, really successful. How have you measured the success of them? How do you know that they are successful?
Touching on, I think Catherine fed into is data. We didn't have it, so we've had to do a lot of a lot more accurately measuring, obviously, the people that are applying for our roles. We've put different things in place. Obviously, it's optional for people to fill this information in, but if they're willing to share, obviously, background information, we've been taking that data. And it was that data ultimately that showed us our blind hiring process was great, but diverse candidates weren't applying in the first place. So we've had to put a lot more investment into that and start to look at different approaches. So data is really, really key, and using it in the right way.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Finally, we will come back on to Dan. So Dan from yourflock.co.uk. And when you were speaking earlier, you touched on the fact that diversity and inclusion is such a broad set of values: diversity of thought, diversity of background, gender, sexuality, neurodiversity, the list goes on. And inclusion as well, inclusion individually, inclusion within the team, within the business, personal engagement, all that, it covers everything. So you've spoken quite a lot about having a very diverse workforce and board yourself at Your Flock. You said yourself it's proving it can be done. So how have you gone about this?
Well, we're very lucky, so we can't kid ourselves. We're a very small team, so we're also I'm not only a vociferous believer in diversity and inclusion, but I was helping the MPA and other things, and Michal is he's Polish, our co-founder's Polish as well, and our board's 60% women, and we literally. We're not just talking about diversity and inclusion. We want to prove that it can be done in tech, 'cause it can be done. And there are lots of good companies that do it. By the way, this is not a moral thing I'm talking about. I know it feels like a moral crusade when I'm talking, but it's actually to do with business. Google and other people and the information, the things out there, I'll send you the links, but you make more money if you have a more diverse and inclusive board. You make better tech products if you have a diverse and inclusive board and a diverse and inclusive team. You just make better, so you make 21% more money because you do that. Now that's just common sense. So people say, well, why are you doing this? And the reason is, I know it sounds awful, it's kind of slightly selfish because we're a small startup that wants to change the world, but we also want to be profitable and make more money. So we help teams, remote teams especially, align their values together and become better teams. Now, it's the really weird thing for Your Flock is, as we find that people who use Your Flock, they tend to have more diverse and inclusive teams, because they haven't used the other metrics for success to recruit people. Yeah. So because they're using values and not going for culture fit and not going for the, as Ian brilliantly put on that, the replication is the problem, isn't it? If you start to replicate, you start to have this culture fit mode and you hire people and it becomes confirmation biased, it's a horrible process. So fair play to Ian and McCann for blind hiring. I'm amazed how many people don't do this. I'm almost appalled by how many people don't do it. And even worse, using AI systems that themselves are, I won't say racist, because that's too strong a term, but they are themselves biased, which are quite famously biased now, and yet loads of people are using them in their businesses and haven't even thought about it because they've never looked at the technology stack. They've just gone, oh, we use that. I'm not going to give the names of them, but some of them use AI systems that have confirmation bias in them. So it's a problem, and you'd never know the problem until you looked at the data. And this is my point about it, yeah. And Ian's absolutely right. Data is king. It's key. It's absolutely key. I might even use the sexist term of saying king. Data is key. If you don't know, you can't do anything about it. So we're very lucky because we're a tiny team. So I can look around and I can say there's only like 10 people involved, and we're going to grow up to about 20, including the board very, very soon. But it's a tiny team. So I can look around and go, okay, are we diverse? Well, I can see in the Zoom call that we're going to be diverse. Are we diverse enough? No, not for me personally. How did we recruit people? I'll be honest with you, I gave myself quotas. I said, I want to have 60% of people on our board who are women. And I gave myself that goal 3 years ago. And we only picked investors and advisors that were women and that were brilliant. And there are lots of them out there. And they've come on board. And I can't, unfortunately, because of a press thing, I can't tell you the bit of good news I was hoping to be able to tell you. But there we go. We can just tell you that's happened. I just can't give you the name of the person. So yeah, the way to do this is kind of, I know it sounds obvious, but the way to do it is to stick to your guns. Yeah, it literally is to take longer to get buy-in from the board and higher. You're not higher as in higher the board, but as in higher than the board. Yeah, you've got to get, so people don't come to you and say, why have you not got someone yet? Because you say, well, because we haven't got a diverse and inclusive company yet, and we need to. So it's going to take a bit longer. And if people are saying, it takes a week more and you're getting told off, you haven't got buy-in, have you? You haven't got the 7 pillars that you need for change. You haven't got the leadership buy-in. Because if you're getting told off because you're not getting people in through the doors, they've missed the point. Yeah. You also have got to have more resources. So another, obviously, your flock costs money, and it's great to, employment engagement and aligning values and recruiting and all that stuff. But it's a tech company that costs money. Yeah. Well, there's hundreds of tech things that you can use now to help you in this bit that you need to do. Not just about diversity and inclusion, but through everything. Yeah. So, if you're not listening and using engagement surveys and other technology, you have to start doing that. You have to start spending money. It's just resources. The more money you can spend on this, the better it's going to be. And these technology companies aren't very expensive, but here's one for you, and it tends to make people a bit worried, but it's true. You have to spend 3 times more on the people than you do on the technology. Okay? Technology does not abrogate your responsibility to put resources in. It doesn't. This is too important. You can't just go, oh, we've got this bit of kit and therefore we don't have to worry about this, because that's not the way it will work. So, okay, use something like Your Flock, use something like Peakon, use something like this, hundreds of these things that are out there. Use them, but don't just get the data for the sake of it. You have to take action. That's how you've got the accountability thing we're talking about, yeah? So we've got allyship, great A. Accountability, brilliant. But the last one, action. And you can only take action if you've got the right data. So if you're not listening and you're not being data driven and getting that engagement level and all that stuff, believe you me, your business, honestly, I know it sounds awful, but I don't know if those businesses and those agencies will survive this next bit. 40% of people right now are looking for a job, by the way. It's 42% in America. That's doubled in the last year. People are literally actively saying, I'm going to quit. Yeah. And they're going to leave. Now they're going to go somewhere, and we're going to have a global marketplace for talent. We are. That's where it's going to be. And if you're saying, oh, well, diversity inclusions are nice to have, it's not going to be. It's going to be actually core to your employee brand. If you're not proving, if you're just thinking, oh, well, we look around and 90% of us look the same, you're going to have a problem because half of them want to leave. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't know which half it is, and you're going to have to replace them. And when you replace them, my only advice is do it based on values. Do it based on, doing something, I know it sounds very hippie, but doing something which is a positive good for the world is actually good business. Because the next person, the next generation who want to work for you will not work for you if they think you're nasty and you're horrid, and they can see through the marketing nonsense. They can see straight through it. Yeah. Okay? Now, as 40-year-olds, and believe me, I worry about us more than all the rest, because we can't tend to see through these moments, and we still believe in some of the old nonsense. Yeah. And believe me, we're the people that need to be reskilled more than anyone else, but that's a different point entirely. But the younger generation, and when I say younger, I mean, I'm 46, so we're talking about, half of the population that's going to be working for you in the next 5 years. We call them younger, it's ridiculous. All the millennials, I mean, God, they're already here. I mean, they're bosses of companies. These people won't stand for it, and they will leave your business and make their own. So you've got a choice as the leaders of tomorrow, which you won't be, by the way, if you don't have a business anymore. You've got to embrace this stuff. You've got to. You don't really have a choice. I know it sounds awful, but the reason why I'm so positive about it, though, is it becomes a fantastic opportunity, not only for personal growth and personal development, but also for making the world a better place. Because we can recruit more people who are disabled, because we don't have to worry as much about the office space. We can recruit part-time mums that have just had a baby, because you can recruit part-time. Now, you can do all this stuff. Now, you might say, but I don't have the technology to do all this. But it exists. Honestly, that you can do all of it. It's all doable with the right technology and the right people. You can change your company culture and you can change what you're doing. But, and this is the big one, you've got to think about, Simon Sinek says, start with your why. Yeah. But actually, I don't think it is about starting with your why. You've got to start with the who. Who is going to do all this stuff? So you've got to employ people that are going to do it. You've got to give them the resources they need to change the business. You've got to step back. You've got to listen more. And I suppose the last one is, you've got to be prepared to change yourself. And I think that's the bit that Sarah's talking about vulnerability, because I don't know, including myself, it's not always easy to change as a bloke of a certain age. It's quite a challenge. And, without being too silly about it, welling up here, but without being too silly about it, that's going to be the future, isn't it? Create yourself a bit of space, lads, because this next few years, we're going to all have to change, not only change ourselves, but change the company cultures in which we live. Of course, if you'd like to, you could use Your Flock and other things. Of course, I'm not going to say you shouldn't. Recruit on values, for goodness sake, people. And I know Ian's got a great point when he says it's, you can't just click your fingers, and it's not as easy as all that, especially if you're recruiting loads of people. By the way, Ian, loving the apprenticeship stuff. I was about to talk about Kickstarter and the importance of getting behind that. And I think if we do more of that, then there's less of almost a financial danger and imperative. But I think we've got a great opportunity there with Kickstarter and other schemes, especially apprenticeships, where we can tap into a diverse crowd that's already there. Because you talk to apprentice providers and they'll tell you that it's a diverse group they've got. And if you start removing those barriers, then we can do a really nice thing with the world. But you can tell my dad's a vicar because that was all a bit sermony, wasn't it? Sorry, it wasn't meant to be sermony. It wasn't meant to be that preachy.
Thank you so much for that. Catherine, I can see you nodding along and writing some things down. Have you got any thoughts to add on that?
Oh, so much. I'm loving this. So I think the point around being relevant in the future is huge. So this is as a leader, this is as an organisation, this is as an employer, and this is in terms of creating, developing products that your customers or your consumers want. So that is absolutely huge. Because employees are looking at who do I want to go and work for, and consumers are looking at where do I want to put my money. So that's massive. In terms of data, 100%. If you're not measuring all of the things that you're doing, you're just busy doing stuff. So I'll give you a real example at Sky. The data that we used was attraction, shortlisting, interviewing, hiring, progression, and leadership. So right the way through the process. What is the diversity in all of those places, because that allows you to see where it's working really well and where you need to take action, and which part of the business that you need to zone in on, particularly if you've got a big business. The other bit was on screen. So who are the presenters, who are the guests, who are we interviewing on Sky Sports and Sky News? So news is obviously very reactive, sports is planned around the seasons, but also in entertainment, who are the directors, who are the writers, who are the producers, who are the top talent on screen? If you don't measure it, you don't know where the problem is. So you've got to measure it first, and you've got to be brave about that, because the first cut is probably going to be quite uncomfortable. But then, you can actually collaborate with the people who do the jobs. And I think that's another really important piece. So invest in the skill, pay people to help you do this stuff. If you can't employ somebody, pay somebody external to help you do this stuff, but do it in collaboration with the people who know your business and know their jobs. And that's what will make it stick, and that's what makes it authentic. And then the other bit of data was engagement survey. So that's been mentioned. I'm really pleased. If you're measuring something that says how happy are people working here, or I get good opportunities to grow my career, or I'm empowered when I've got a good idea, or any of those questions, if you're not slicing that data up so that you can see how different groups have answered that question, it's not going to tell you anything.
Yeah.
Because if you get a score back that says, oh, do you know what, 88, we got 88 out of 100 for that, it's great, nothing to see here, doesn't tell you anything. If you slice that for your overrepresented groups and your underrepresented groups, what you will find is your overrepresented group is pulling the score up because they're having a much better experience, and your underrepresented groups are having a less good experience, and it's hidden. So data, 100%. So pleased that that's come up. And then just the last point, I have a slightly different perspective on blind hiring. One, I don't think the term blind is great, but also if you want to change your culture and you want people to be conscious about their inclusion, individuals need to make the commitments to do stuff differently rather than relying on a process.
Right. Okay.
It's very easy to sign up to an organisation ambition, say, yes, we want to be diverse, yes, we want to be inclusive. And I believe people mean it when they say that.
Yeah.
It is harder and much more important for individuals to say, I'm going to show up and this is how I'm going to make decisions and this is what I'm going to do differently. I've been doing it this way for however long, and I've realised that that's creating barriers for people. Therefore, I'm going to do some stuff differently.
Yeah, but that links nicely back to Sarah's point about the vulnerability and the I may have been wrong in the past, or I may have had unconscious bias or anything like that, and actually I'm going to change my ways personally. And that could be anybody in the business, from right down, like right the way up to senior leadership teams. So that's all really nicely linked together. Thank you so much. Finally today, just to close up the webinar, we're just going to take some questions from the viewers. Nathan Anibaba says, love it all, guys. Thank you. Does this change need to come bottom up or top down? And to follow on from that, and where should you start as a small agency? Who would like to come in on that one? Catherine, you gave me that look.
I was smiling at Dan because he's got his hand up.
Oh, Leslie, sorry, it's not off my video. Dan?
I worried that I knew I was going to interrupt, so I put my hand up to make sure I was good. It's because it's such a fascinating question. This is actually what Your Flock is based on. We believe at Your Flock that it should and can come from ground up, so to speak, grassroots upwards, because when you ask 1,000 people what their values are, you then get a value map. And that value map can then be looked at, and that's the data point. Yeah, you get a not necessarily a company culture map, but a value map. And that's really, really important. However, it's fascinating to see when people use this, one of the biggest things we get asked loads is, can we change the values, please? Because they're not our brand values. No, because that undermines the 7 years of research it took to actually build the model. So no, you can't. But the other one is, as senior leadership team, don't we get 2 votes rather than 1? Because we're the bosses. So our values are more important. So if we're aligned in our values, surely that should cascade down. That's literally what people ask for. And I completely get it. But can everyone feel and maybe see that's part of the problem? There's an implied moment there, and the senior leadership team are literally saying, well, we're more important, therefore our values are more important than everyone else's. And so, yeah, I'm totally with the caller, with the question, should I say, it's just giving people the data. You find out the senior leadership team's values and whether they align together as a team. Find out your team's different values, and then find out the company values and see how it all aligns, and then start making decisions, because you might find, as we do, there's a disconnect between the senior leadership team, middle management as well, and also the people doing lots of the work. And that's in larger businesses. In a small agency, I would say, honestly, start doing that work now before you become a big agency. Because the way you'll become a bigger agency and you retain people is by finding out these answers now and start listening now. Our engagement surveys are based on the values, not of the brand values of the company, but the values that we find out are important to the employees as well as senior leadership team. So it's about really holistic listening around those values. And now I'll be quiet because I could talk about it for a day. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say to that is that when you have that information and you have those values, it's also not fixed. It's not fixed for life, which is often the thought is that they are the values for life of the company, of the business, and they're never going to change. So anybody coming into the business, there's no movement there. So yeah, it's always continual as well.
Yeah, of course.
That's what makes it harder, doesn't it? That's what I'm saying. Assume it's going to be harder, because when you start looking and caring, it continually evolves, and that's a good thing, because evolution's good. It's how we become better. It's how we become more resilient. It's how we become better as a species and a society. Yeah, but it will evolve. So you can't just say, oh, it's set in stone. And that's, I think, sometimes what we do as leaders. We go, these are our values. It's set in stone. You better fit in. And then people lie and say they fit in, and then we wonder why they then leave. Because 34% of people leave because a company because they don't believe they fit in. It goes up to something like 78% of people leave because they don't like their boss. So, take that one home. I mean, think about that. Think about how bad that is. But there you go. Thank you, Sarah. It's a really good point. Values always evolve, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I think we've got time for one more question. Musa Ayub has asked, employers and business owners need to change their mindset to make sure that when they recruit, they give all candidates an opportunity rather than a certain segment. What about anonymizing the process to reduce bias in the process until interview stage? Is that the blind hiring piece, or does that relate to the blind hiring piece? Who has a thought on that question? Ian's put his hand up.
So that's in effect what we've done, certainly initially for all our early careers hires. There's very few entry criteria to apply. Everybody then is set a similar assessment that is related to the role, and that could be something to do with numeracy or data analysis or some questions around your thinking around brands, etc., depending on the nature of the role. But all of those are screened with reference number. We've got no idea who we're looking at, who sent it in, what background they've come from, what part of the world they're from. As Dan said earlier, I think there's a lot of opportunities for agencies now to be recruiting outside of the 20-mile radius of Prestbury in our case, Manchester and others. So yeah, that is in effect what the sort of process we've been trialing and rolling out. And yeah, it takes time to get it absolutely right, but I think we're getting to that point where we're close to that. Yeah, sounds like you're well on your way. Right, lovely. Well, I think the biggest takeaway that I've taken from all of this, from speaking to all of you from the podcast and from today, is the data piece and holding yourselves accountable as senior leaders, but also holding everybody in your business accountable. So thank you so much to the panel for taking the time to speak today, and thank you to everybody watching. The highlights of today's talk will be available on prolificnorth.co.uk next week. And I'll be putting out some more links to the podcast that I've done with each of you as well while they're still live. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks, Rosie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie.